Ness stood before a land that most people had abandoned long ago. The maps from the 1920s marked this ground with a single word: impossible. Too many. It meant there was no chance of success. To Rick, it was a challenge. Beneath the frozen Yukon wilderness lay something more than just rock, gravel, and permafrost. There were whispers of a hidden fortune, a treasure sealed away by ice for thousands of years. Rick could see what others could not. Where most people saw danger, he saw potential. This land had a reputation that stretched back nearly a century. Men had come here with dreams of riches, and many of them had left with nothing but frostbite, broken equipment, and shattered hopes. Some never left at all. The stories of deaths and disappearances in this frozen ground had created an aura of fear around it. Old journals written by trappers spoke of glittering rock locked inside ice, almost within reach, but always out of grasp. These stories were passed down like warnings, but Rick didn't take them as warnings. He took them as clues. He knew the risks. He knew men had died here. He knew this ground had defeated others before him, but there was something in him that refused to give up, something that told him that he had to try, no matter the cost. He was not the kind of man who would walk away just because the odds were stacked against him. And so, Rick and his crew prepared to dig into the frozen heart of the Yukon. From the very first strike of the excavators, the crew realized this was no ordinary challenge. The permafrost was unlike anything they had ever faced. The machines bit into the frozen ground, but instead of breaking apart, the ground fought back. Sparks flew from the steel teeth of the excavators as if they were striking solid rock. Jackhammers bounced off uselessly, even when they tried dynamite. The explosions barely made a dent in the frozen wall. It was as if nature itself had built a vault to protect whatever secrets were buried below. Industrial heaters that usually melted through ice with ease failed to make any progress. The deeper they tried to go, the tougher the ice became. Every single foot gained felt like a victory, but also a reminder that they were digging into something ancient, something that had been sealed for a reason. As they dug deeper, strange things began to happen. At night, when the camp was quiet and the wind howled across the frozen land, some of the crew swore they could hear voices. Groans, whispers, and echoes seemed to rise from the very ground they were breaking into. At first, Rick brushed it off as stress, fatigue, or the tricks of an overactive imagination. But as more workers came forward, describing the same sounds, it became harder to ignore. Some said it felt like the ground itself was alive, as though the ice was warning them not to go further. Then came the day that changed everything. A backhoe operator struck something buried in the wall of frozen earth. It wasn't rock. It wasn't gravel. When the ice cleared away, the crew found themselves staring at an iron tool embedded deep inside strata that geologists claimed was thousands of years old. The tool was clearly handmade, forged by human hands. But it should not have been there. It didn't belong to any known time period for the Yukon. It was far older than the first recorded settlements in the area. When experts came to study the artifact, they were baffled. One geologist admitted to Rick that this discovery made no sense. How could an ancient tool exist in frozen layers untouched for thousands of years? Was this evidence that others had been here long before recorded history? Could this have been an ancient mining attempt, lost to time and sealed away by the ice? The questions piled up, but the answers remained hidden beneath the permafrost. Some of Rick's crew felt unsettled by the find. To them, it wasn't a discovery, it was a warning. If others had been here before and failed, what made them think they could succeed? Whispers spread that the land was cursed, that it was never meant to be disturbed. But Rick wasn't the kind of man to walk away. If anything, the discovery only fueled his determination. If someone had come here looking for gold long ago, then he was going to finish what they started. As winter tightened its grip, the challenges grew worse. The cold was unrelenting, and the strain on the crew was reaching a breaking point. Tempers flared, arguments erupted. Some workers demanded that Rick shut the whole operation down before someone got killed. Others claimed they were seeing strange things in the fog at night. Dark figures, shapes moving in the distance, always vanishing before anyone could get close. Hallucinations, perhaps, brought on by exhaustion and fear, or maybe something more. Rick tried to keep the crew focused, but the pressure mounted with every passing day. Equipment began to fail mysteriously. Fuel lines froze even when they shouldn't have. Machines that had been checked and serviced suddenly broke down. It wasn't just bad luck. Someone was tampering with their operation. Sabotage. But by who? Was it rival miners trying to ruin Rick's claim, or was it someone within his own camp? In an environment this harsh, sabotage wasn't just an inconvenience, it could be deadly. The breaking point came with disaster. Without warning, an entire wall of permafrost collapsed in a thunderous avalanche of ice and rock. Equipment worth thousands was buried in seconds. A bulldozer was completely crushed. The operator barely escaped, but his injuries were severe. Rick himself nearly died when a steel cable snapped and whipped past his head, missing him by inches. The crew was shaken to their core. Many wanted to pack up and leave immediately. When word of the accident spread outside, the media was quick to pounce. Headlines called Rick's claim the death pit of the Yukon. Safety inspectors threatened to shut down the site. Investors demanded that Rick abandon the operation before more lives were lost. But Rick couldn't walk away. He had already poured too much into this frozen ground, and he knew he was close. Instead of backing down, he doubled down. He brought in more equipment, more resources, and more determination, and then, after months of suffering and struggle, it happened. A routine excavation revealed something that stopped the crew in their tracks. In the harsh beam of their torches, the ice glittered like fire. A wall of visible gold laced through the gravel, shining like liquid light frozen in time. Nuggets gleamed from the walls like stars trapped in ice. The crew fell silent. After everything they had endured, after the danger, the sabotage, the accidents, they had finally found it. Rick sent samples to the ASSI lab, but when the results came back, even he couldn't believe them. The gold content was so high that the lab accused him of tampering, but Rick knew the truth. They had struck the greatest permafrost deposit ever recorded. The estimated value was staggering $70 million in recoverable gold. It was the strike of a lifetime, the kind of discovery that miners dreamed of but almost never achieved. Rick had done it. He had broken through nature's frozen vault and found its treasure. But the frozen ground had one more secret. As they stripped away more layers of ice, their excavator broke into a hollow void deep below. The crew climbed down with flashlights, and what they found left them shaken. It wasn't just a cavern. It was a chamber. The walls glistened with gold-bearing ore. Boulders glittered like treasure chests split open, but on one wall was something even stranger. Carvings, symbols that looked like Norse runes etched deep into the stone. The discovery sent shivers down their spines. Could ancient explorers have reached this frozen land centuries before anyone thought possible? Had Vikings carved their mark into this place long before the modern world even knew it existed? The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about gold anymore. It was about history, about secrets buried in the earth that had been waiting to be discovered. Rick's crew was divided. Some felt they were trespassing on sacred ground, that they should leave the chamber alone and take only what they had already uncovered. But Rick wasn't about to turn back. Gold was gold, and this chamber was full of it. He had risked everything to get this far, and he wasn't about to stop now. Ness and his crew now faced a challenge that was far greater than digging through frozen ground. The discovery of the mysterious tool, embedded deep inside the ancient ice, had opened a door to questions no one could answer. Geologists who studied it were left confused. How could something clearly forged by human hands be locked inside a layer of earth that science said was thousands of years old? That alone could have changed history books, but for Rick, it was only one more reason to keep digging. He believed that where there was one sign of human presence, there might be more. And if ancient miners had once tried to reach the gold hidden below, then it meant they were right all along the frozen ground was hiding something worth dying for. Still, each day of excavation felt like a battle against both time and nature. The permafrost was harder than concrete. Excavators sparked against it, drills snapped, and even blasting with dynamite barely scratched the surface. The crew grew frustrated. They worked in freezing conditions where every breath stung their lungs, and every mistake could mean injury or death. At night, the sounds coming from the ice returned, groaning, cracking, and sometimes noises that resembled whispers. Men swore they could hear voices calling out, trapped beneath the frozen walls. At first, Rick dismissed it as imagination, a trick played by stress and exhaustion. But as more and more of his crew reported the same experience, even he began to wonder if something deeper was happening. One bitter night, while inspecting the equipment, Rick himself heard it, a low sound, like a human moan, echoing from deep within the ground. He stood still, the cold biting through his jacket, and listened. It lasted only seconds, but it was enough to unsettle him. For the first time, Rick questioned whether this land truly wanted to give up its secrets, or whether they were forcing their way into something meant to stay hidden. But turning back was no longer an option. Costs had risen to unbearable levels. Investors were angry, demanding progress. Some even threatened to pull their funding completely if Rick didn't show results soon. Worse, tension inside the crew had reached a breaking point. Men were arguing, fights broke out, and there were even whispers of sabotage. Equipment that had been perfectly fine the day before would suddenly stop working. Fuel lines froze in ways that didn't make sense. It became clear that someone among them didn't want the operation to succeed. Then came the avalanche. Without warning, an entire wall of permafrost collapsed, burying heavy machinery under tons of ice and rock. A bulldozer was completely destroyed, and the operator barely escaped alive. His arm was broken in 3 places, and Rick himself nearly died when a steel cable snapped and whipped past his head. The crew was shaken to their core. Some called it a sign to leave immediately. Headlines in the media soon labeled Rick's claim the death pit of the Yukon, and safety officials threatened to shut the site down. Investors demanded he walk away before more lives were lost. But Ness had never been the kind of man to quit. Instead of abandoning the frozen land, he doubled down. He poured more money, more resources, and more determination into the dig. His reasoning was simple. If this land was fighting so hard to protect its secret, then the reward waiting beneath had to be worth it. And then, the breakthrough came. One ordinary day of digging turned extraordinary when a backhoe operator struck something shining in the ice as the crew cleared away the frozen debris. They couldn't believe their eyes. A wall of gold, real, visible gold, ran through the gravel like veins of liquid fire. Nuggets sparkled in the torchlight, glowing in the frozen walls as if nature itself had preserved them for this moment. The crew gathered in stunned silence, realizing they were standing on the edge of something massive. Rick wasted no time. Samples were collected and sent to a lab for testing. But when the results came back, no one believed them. The gold concentration was so high that the lab accused Rick of tampering with the samples. Numbers like these weren't supposed to exist anymore, not in modern mining. But Rick knew what he had found was real. He called his crew together and told them what they all had been waiting to hear. They had struck gold, not just a little, but a fortune. Early estimates placed the value at nearly $70 million. The men erupted in cheers. Months of frozen misery, danger, and sacrifice had finally paid off. But as the celebration roared through the camp, the frozen ground wasn't finished revealing its secrets. As they dug deeper to expose the gold-bearing gravel, their excavators broke through into something unexpected, a hollow chamber hidden beneath the glacier, where Rick and his crew descended into the cavern with their flashlights. They were stunned into silence. The walls glistened with gold, or glittering like stars. Boulders with veins of pure gold lay scattered across the floor. But the most shocking sight was the carvings etched into one of the chamber wall symbols that looked like Norse runes. The crew stood frozen. If the carvings were real, it meant ancient explorers had reached this place centuries earlier, long before history recorded it. Some of the men wanted to stop immediately, believing they had stumbled into something sacred, something that wasn't meant to be touched. But Rick saw it differently. If others had come here searching for gold, then he would finish what they started. Word of the discovery spread fast, and soon Rick's problems grew even more dangerous. Rival mining companies began circling, desperate to claim the site for themselves. Sabotage attempts increased, with equipment destroyed in ways that suggested insider knowledge. Security cameras caught masked figures lurking near the camp. Fuel lines were cut, machines damaged, and one night, a fire nearly consumed the entire operation. Rick realized his enemies weren't just shadows in the ice, they were real, and they wanted his gold. So he made a decision. His crew would arm themselves and protect the claim at all costs. "We defend this ground with our lives," he told them, because if they didn't, someone else would take it. But just as Rick thought he understood the threats around him, a new enemy emerged: the government. Officials suddenly declared his mining site a restricted environmental zone. Records of the claim began disappearing from archives. Geological surveys that had existed for decades were suddenly erased. It was as if someone was trying to wipe the site off the map entirely. Rumors exploded online. Some claimed Rick had uncovered evidence of a lost civilization. Others said the government wanted to hide the truth about ancient explorers in North America. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire, linking the mysterious chamber to everything from Vikings to aliens. Whatever the truth was, Rick knew one thing for certain: Powerful forces wanted to bury it, and they would stop at nothing. To stay ahead, Rick organized a secret plan to move the gold. A convoy of trucks was loaded with sealed containers, set to travel during a blizzard when visibility would be nearly zero. The journey was dangerous, but it was the only way to protect what they had found. The convoy pushed through snowstorms and icy mountain passes, but midway through, one truck disappeared without a trace. No radio call, no sign of trouble, just gone. Even with the loss, the majority of the gold reached safety, and when the final numbers were tallied, Rick's strike was confirmed. Over $70 million in gold had been pulled from the frozen ground, making it one of the greatest modern finds in mining history. But even as the world celebrated, Rick and his crew knew the real story was far darker. They had disturbed something ancient, something hidden for a reason. The artifact found in the ice vanished without explanation, reportedly taken by unknown men who sealed the chamber with concrete. Crew members whispered about nightmares, about voices that still called from the frozen ground. Some even refused their share of the gold, claiming it was cursed. Rick's discovery became the stuff of legend. Documentaries were filmed, news outlets covered it worldwide, and Rick himself became a polarizing figure. To some, he was a hero. To others, a man who had disturbed something sacred. But Rick, when asked about it, always gave the same unsettling response. He would smile and say, "The ground isn't empty, it remembers." The world soon learned of Rick Ness's frozen strike, and the story spread faster than wildfire. Newspapers called it the impossible discovery, while television networks rushed to cover every angle. Mining experts described it as a once-in-a-lifetime event. Financial media outlets labeled Rick the man who broke the Yukon. But behind all the headlines, behind the fame and celebration, the truth was far stranger than what the public was told. Because those who were actually there, those who dug with their own hands and stared into the frozen cavern, knew that Rick's strike was not just about gold. It was about something much older, much more mysterious, and possibly much more dangerous. Some crew members quietly admitted they never wanted to go back to that site again. They described it as cursed. Others refused to take their share of the profits, saying the gold had been tainted by whatever was buried in that ice. One man, Jake Morrison, who had worked side by side with Rick through the entire ordeal, told a mining journal that he would never forget the feeling of being inside that chamber. He described the air as heavy, like it was pressing against your lungs. He swore the walls whispered if you stood in silence long enough. Jake refused his profit share entirely, donating it all to charity. That gold came from somewhere. It wasn't meant to leave, he said. You can't put a price on that kind of mistake. Rick, however, saw things differently. He had risked everything to break into that frozen vault, and now he was being told he should walk away. No, he wasn't about to abandon the greatest discovery of his life, but as he pushed forward, he quickly realized he wasn't just fighting the ice anymore. He was fighting rivals, saboteurs, the government, and even the weight of history itself. The attacks on his operation escalated. Crews found machines damaged in precise, deliberate ways that could only have been done by someone who understood mining equipment. Fuel supplies vanished. Tires were slashed. One night, someone cut through a security fence and tampered with explosives stored at the site, nearly causing a disaster that would have killed dozens of workers. Security cameras captured figures moving just outside the lights, always staying in the shadows. They never got close enough to be identified, but they were always there, watching. Rick responded the only way he knew how, by taking control. He armed his men, set up watchtowers, and posted guards 24 hours a day. The frozen mining camp began to look less like a workplace and more like a military base. Men carried rifles as they worked, and at night, searchlights swept across the icy landscape. Some said it felt like they were preparing for war, and perhaps they were, because the more gold they pulled from the ground, the more enemies they seemed to attract. Rumors spread of rival mining syndicates planning raids. Whispers about corporate black ops teams circulated among the crew. Whether or not those stories were true didn't matter. The fear was real, but then came a blow no amount of preparation could protect against. The government, Canadian authorities, suddenly declared Rick's site an environmental danger zone, claiming his operation threatened to destabilize the permafrost. But the timing raised too many questions. Why now? Why after months of work? After millions had already been invested? Even stranger, geological surveys that had been available to the public. for decades suddenly disappeared from government records. When reporters tried to access them, they were told they never existed. It was as if someone was trying to erase all evidence of Rick's claim. This sparked a flood of theories. Conspiracy forums exploded with speculation. Some claimed the government wanted to seize the gold for itself. Others believed Rick had uncovered something much bigger, evidence of an ancient civilization that powerful people didn't want revealed. Photos of the rune-like carvings leaked online, fueling endless debates. Were they Viking? Were they something else? Could they prove that explorers had reached the Yukon centuries before history recorded it? Even Rick's own crew couldn't agree. Some said the carvings were proof of a lost civilization. Others insisted they were nothing more than natural cracks in the rock that looked like symbols. But no one could deny how strange it felt to stand inside that chamber, surrounded by walls that glittered with gold and carvings that looked like they were placed by human hands. For Rick, there was no turning back. He had the gold. He had the evidence, and he had the world's attention, but he also had more enemies than ever before. So, he made a choice that would shape the rest of his life. He decided to move the gold quietly, secretly, and under the cover of a blizzard. The convoy of trucks left the camp at night. Headlights dimmed, radios silent. They drove through whiteout conditions, winding along treacherous mountain roads where one wrong turn meant certain death. For hours, the trucks pushed through the storm, the drivers gripping their steering wheels with white knuckles. And then, without warning, one of the trucks vanished. No distress call, no trace left behind. It was simply gone. Some said it must have slid off the road and been buried in snow, lost forever. Others believed it was ambushed, taken by rivals who had been waiting for this exact moment. To this day, no one knows what happened to that missing truck or the gold it carried when the rest of the convoy finally reached safety. What remained of Rick's treasure was still valued at over $70 million, an amount so staggering that it shook the mining world to its core. But while the world celebrated, Rick's crew couldn't forget what they had seen, or what they had lost. For them, the gold was only part of the story. The carvings, the whispers, the mysterious artifact that had vanished without explanation, those were the things that haunted them. And perhaps the most chilling part was this: even after the discovery, even after the gold was gone, crew members reported hearing the same strange voices in their dreams. They described nightmares of being trapped inside ice, voices calling out in languages no one could understand, shadows moving just beyond the light. Some crew members quit mining altogether, saying they would never work in the frozen north again. A few even refused to accept their share of the profits, claiming the gold was cursed. Rick himself, despite everything he had gained, became a different man. He rarely spoke publicly about the discovery, and when he did, he always gave the same unsettling response: the ground isn't empty, it remembers. The gold strike made headlines around the world, but the celebration didn't last long. With $70 million worth of gold pulled from the ground, Rickness had become a legend overnight. Yet fame brought its own kind of curse. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of his discovery. Rivals, governments, environmental groups, historians, and even conspiracy theorists all closed in, each with their own version of the truth, and each with their own demands. The first wave came in the form of lawsuits. Rival mining companies accused Rick of stealing gold from their operations. They claimed he had secretly transported it to his site. Though they had no real proof, environmental organizations filed cases arguing that Rick's excavation had destroyed untouched wilderness and destabilized permafrost that had been preserved for thousands of years. Even more bizarre, families of miners who had died chasing the same frozen claim decades earlier filed wrongful death suits, claiming Rick should have warned others about the dangers. But perhaps the strangest lawsuits came from the government itself. Several agencies filed sealed cases under national security laws. The public never learned exactly what those lawsuits said, but rumors swirled that they were tied to the mysterious artifact and the carvings discovered in the frozen chamber. Whatever the truth, it was clear that someone wanted parts of Rick's story hidden forever. While the courts tried to tear his discovery apart, the media turned his strike into a global sensation. Within 6 months, 3 separate documentaries were in production. Netflix announced a limited series called Gold Rush: The Impossible Claim. National Geographic sent crews to recreate Rick's journey, though they were denied access to the actual site. Other networks produced quick specials filled with speculation, dramatic reenactments, and interviews with experts. But the documentaries raised more questions than they answered. Geologists interviewed on camera admitted they had no explanation for how such massive gold deposits could exist in undisturbed permafrost. Historians debated whether the rune-like carvings were authentic, fabricated, or simply misinterpreted natural cracks in the stone, and the artifact, the ancient tool discovered deep in the ice, was never shown again. It had simply vanished. Whispers began to circulate that government agents had confiscated the artifact. Some crew members swore they saw unmarked helicopters arrive at the site shortly after the discovery. Men in black suits reportedly entered the chamber, removed the object, and sealed the entrance with concrete. When reporters asked about these claims, officials denied everything. Yet satellite images clearly showed the ground around the site had been altered, almost as if something had been buried forever. This silence only fueled conspiracy theories. Online forums erupted with speculation. Some claimed the carvings proved that Vikings had reached the Yukon